There's a particular kind of woman the world forgets to see. She's not loud. She doesn't make demands or hold signs or write letters to editors. She rises before the sun does, because someone has to, and she makes coffee strong enough to hold the day together, and she moves through her home like water, filling every crack, every silence, every empty space that other people leave behind without noticing they've left it. I was that woman. My name is Clara, and for most of my adult life, I believed that being invisible was the same as being good. The farmhouse on Ridgemont Road had been mine since 1987. I didn't inherit it. I want to be clear about that, because some people assume a woman my age must have been given something to have something worth keeping. No, I worked for it. I spent 11 years as a night shift bookkeeper at a regional trucking company, eating cold sandwiches at a desk that faced a cinder block wall, running numbers until my eyes burned, saving every dollar I didn't absolutely need to spend. When the previous owner, old Mr. Hargrove, decided to sell, I was the only one who showed up with cash. Not a check. Cash. In an envelope. He shook my hand twice. I think he was surprised. The property wasn't beautiful when I bought it 2 acres of patchy grass, a drafty farmhouse with a furnace that sounded like it was clearing its throat, a small apple orchard along the north fence that had gone wild and unpruned for years. But I saw what it could become. I always had that, even when I had nothing else. The ability to see past what something was and into what it wanted to be. I raised my son Daniel there, on Ridgemont Road, mostly alone after his father Raymond left when Daniel was 4. Raymond wasn't a bad man. I've always said that, honestly, he was just a man made entirely of present tense, unable to imagine a future that required patience. He sent birthday cards sometimes. He remarried. He moved to Phoenix. Life arranged itself the way it does. Daniel grew up running through the orchard, climbing the fence posts, bringing home stray animals with the absolute confidence that his mother would figure out how to feed them. He was joyful, my son, gap-toothed and sun-browned, and incapable of walking past a mud puddle without jumping in it. I used to watch him sleep when he was small and feel something so large move through my chest that I didn't have a word for it. Not just love, something beyond love, a kind of ferocious, helpless devotion that I now understand is both the most beautiful and most dangerous thing a mother can feel. Because that devotion, if you're not careful, becomes a door that swings only one way. By the time Daniel was grown, I had paid off the farmhouse entirely. The orchard was producing again. I'd learned to prune them myself from a library book, then from a neighbor, then from years of patient repetition. I'd renovated the kitchen with my own hands and hired help, only for what I genuinely couldn't manage alone. The house on Ridgemont Road was not grand. It was not impressive by any measure a real estate agent would use. But it was solid, and it was mine, and every corner of it held something I had put there on purpose. Then Daniel met Renata. She was 28 when they began dating, sharp-eyed and stylish in a way that felt almost like a warning I didn't know how to read. She wasn't unkind at first, or rather, her unkindness was so well-dressed that I mistook it for confidence. She had opinions about everything and delivered them like gifts, as though her certainty was something you ought to be grateful to receive. Daniel loved her completely. That was clear from the beginning. He looked at her the way very kind. People sometimes look at beautiful, difficult things with a kind of wondering helplessness, as if he couldn't quite believe his luck and was already afraid of losing it. They got engaged after 14 months. I made dinner to celebrate. I bought champagne I couldn't really afford. I hugged Renata at the door and told her I was so glad she was going to be part of our family And I meant it. I genuinely meant it. When Daniel suggested they move into Ridgemont Road just temporarily, just while they saved enough for their own place, I didn't hesitate. The house had 4 bedrooms. I was rattling around in it alone. It seemed at the time like an obvious kindness, a practical generosity that would benefit everyone. I cleared out the 2 largest bedrooms for them. I bought new bedding. I repainted the bathroom down the hall in the color ore. Renata mentioned she liked a gray-green called Quiet Morning. I moved my sewing things into the small back room. That had always been more of a storage closet than a proper space, but I arranged it carefully and told myself it was cozy. The first night they were there, Daniel hugged me in the kitchen and said, "You're the best mother alive, Mom." I mean that. I held on to that for a long time, longer than I should have. Looking back now, from the distance of everything that's happened, since I can see the architecture of those early days more clearly. I can see how quickly temporary became indefinite, how our home shifted, almost imperceptibly, into their home, with me as a fixture in it. How every small accommodation I made was accepted without acknowledgement, absorbed into the new normal without comment, like water into dry ground. I told myself it was just adjustment, growing pains of shared living. Love required flexibility, didn't it? Love required you to hold space for other people, even when it cost you your own. I had believed that for so long. I'd built my whole life on it. It took me another 2 years to understand that I hadn't been practicing love. I'd been practicing disappearance, and the people I'd invited into my home had been happy, genuinely, comfortably happy to let me disappear. The orchard bloomed that first spring, as it always did. I walked through it alone one April morning, touching the rough bark of each tree, counting blossoms the way I'd learned to do. Behind me, through the kitchen window, I could hear Renata laughing at something on her phone. The sound was bright and careless, and belonged entirely to someone who had never had to be careful about anything. I stood among my apple trees and breathed. I didn't know yet what was coming, but something in me, something old and quiet, and not yet entirely erased, was paying attention. There is a process by which a person becomes invisible inside their own life. It doesn't happen all at once. That's the thing no one warns you about. It's not a single moment of cruelty, not one dramatic event you can point to and say, "There, that's when everything changed." It's quieter than that. It's 1,000 small erasures, each one so minor that objecting to any one of them feels unreasonable, even to yourself. It started for me with the kitchen. Renata reorganized the cabinets 3 months after moving in. She didn't ask. She mentioned it afterward, almost as an afterthought. "I moved some things around. Hope that's okay." In the tone of someone who already knows the answer is yes, because they've already moved the things. My cast iron skillet, which I had used every morning for 19 years, appeared on the bottom shelf behind the stock pots. The mugs I preferred were replaced with a matching set she'd ordered online. White, minimal. They held heat poorly. I moved my skillet back. 2 days later, it was behind the stock pots again. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was a small thing. Then she began hosting. Dinner parties, cocktail evenings, long weekend brunches for her friends. A rotating crowd of young professionals who filled the house with the particular energy of people who have never had to worry about anything structural. They were not unkind to me. They were worse than unkind. They were politely unaware of me, the way people are unaware of a vase that's been in the same spot so long, it's become part of the wall. I cooked for these gatherings. I want to say that plainly, without drama, because I think the plainness of it is more honest than outrage would be. I cooked because I was there, and the food needed cooking, and no one else was going to do it. I made things I was proud of: slow braised dishes, my mother's bread recipe, apple cakes from the orchard fruit. I set things on the table and retreated to the kitchen, and the guests ate and complimented the food to Renata. And Renata accepted the compliments with the ease of someone who had earned them. Daniel knew I had made the food. He didn't correct anyone. My bedroom became smaller in ways that had nothing to do with its dimensions. It was simply the room I spent more and more time in. I bought a small second-hand armchair and put it by the window, and in the evenings, when the house was full of noise that didn't include me, I sat in that chair with a book and listened to my own breathing and tried to remember who I was when I was alone. The word that comes to mind now, looking back, is managed. I was being managed, not maliciously or not entirely maliciously, but with the practiced efficiency of people who have identified what you need to feel valued and have learned to supply just enough of it to keep you functional and compliant. Daniel would have a warm moment with me over morning coffee, just the two of us, and I'd carry the warmth of it for days. Renata would occasionally ask my advice about something domestic, a recipe, a home repair, and I would feel, briefly, useful, seen. These were the mechanisms by which I was kept in place, and I participated in them willingly because the alternative, admitting what was happening, felt too enormous to face. There was a Saturday afternoon in early October when I came closest to seeing the truth clearly. I had spent the morning clearing leaves from the orchard path and had come inside to find Renata giving a tour of the house to a couple. I'd never met friends of hers visiting from the city. I stood in the hallway in my muddy boots, clutching my garden gloves, and listened to her describe each room with the authority of ownership. "We've done a lot of work to make it feel more modern," she was saying, gesturing at the kitchen I'd renovated with my own savings in 2009. It was pretty dated when we took it on. The couple nodded appreciatively. I stood in the hallway. Nobody introduced me. I went back outside and sat on the porch steps and looked at the orchard for a long time. The apple trees stood in their rows, patient and enduring, the way old things learn to be. I had planted 2 of those trees myself, the summer Daniel turned 12. We'd done it together, he and I, with a second-hand book on orchard management and more enthusiasm than expertise. He'd named them both. I couldn't remember what names he'd chosen. That bothered me more than the tour had. I was losing not just my present, but my past. The memories that lived in this house were being quietly overwritten, the way an old recording gets taped over. And somehow I had allowed it, had stood by while it happened, had even, in my own terrible way, helped it along, because I so desperately wanted to believe that staying soft and accommodating and undemanding was the same thing as keeping the peace. It wasn't. I understand that now. Keeping the peace, when the peace is built on your erasure, is just another word for surrender. The evening I describe next is the evening things became irreversible. Not because of what happened, the event itself was small, in the way that the last straw is always technically small, but because of what it clarified. Daniel's colleague Thomas was visiting. I had made dinner a full dinner: roast chicken with herbs from my garden, roasted vegetables, bread I'd baked that morning. I served it, cleared the first course, was moving quietly in and out of the kitchen the way I'd learned to do, and I heard Thomas ask, cheerfully, genuinely curious, "So who does all the cooking around here? This is incredible." And Daniel laughed easily, comfortably, without hesitation, and said, "Oh, that's just Clara. She's like our live-in housekeeper. Keeps everything running." Thomas laughed. Renata smiled and leaned into Daniel's shoulder. I was standing just inside the kitchen doorway. I had a serving dish in my hands. I set the dish down carefully on the counter. I turned on the tap and let cold water run over my wrists, which is something I'd done since I was a girl when I needed to stay composed. I looked at my own hands under the water. They were the hands of a woman who had built something, paid for it, earned it, protected it through hard years and lonely ones, and years that felt like both at once. Live-in housekeeper. My son had looked at his friend and made me small with the ease of a man who has never had to think about what it costs to be made small. I turned off the tap. I dried my hands. I walked back into the dining room and served the rest of the meal. But something had ended. I could feel the place where it had been, the way you feel the space left by a tooth that's gone. Not immediately painful, just profoundly, unmistakably absent. I had given this man everything I had, and he had just told me, in front of a stranger, that I was the help. That night, I went to my room and sat in my armchair by the window and looked out at the dark shape of the orchard. I thought about the deed in the filing cabinet in my closet. I thought about the name on it. Then I picked up my phone and looked up the number of a lawyer I'd seen advertised at the local library. I didn't call yet, but I wrote the number down. I've always kept things: letters, receipts, birthday cards with the envelopes still attached. I don't know where I got the habit. Maybe from my mother, who kept everything in shoeboxes under her bed, as though objects were memories you could hold in your hands and make permanent. After I moved out of Ridgemont Road, I took very little with me: a bag of clothes, my important documents, a photograph of Daniel at 7 years old, standing in the orchard with a gap-toothed grin and both arms stretched wide, as if he was trying to hug the whole sky. I left the furniture. I left the cast-iron skillet. I left 33 years of accumulated living. But I took the shoebox from my mother. I was staying at my friend Miriam's spare room, Miriam, who has known me since we were both 30 and running on 4 hours of sleep and borrowed courage, who opened her door without questions and made up the bed and left a pot of chamomile tea on the nightstand. She is the kind of friend who understands that sometimes the most important thing you can offer someone is a room where nothing is required of them. I sat on the edge of that bed for what felt like a very long time. Then I opened the shoebox. Most of what was inside was exactly what I expected: old Christmas cards, a letter from Daniel's first-grade teacher, a birthday note from Raymond from 1991 that I'd never thrown away out of something more complicated than sentiment. But near the bottom, tucked inside a larger envelope I didn't immediately recognize, were documents I'd never seen. Medical papers, dense with the language of administration, from a hospital I didn't know I'd ever been a patient at. And beneath those, a letter in my mother's handwriting. My mother had been a careful woman, deliberate. She did not write things down unless she intended them to be found, and she did not intend them to be found until she decided it was time. The letter told me something that I am still, even now, not entirely sure how to hold. I'll tell you plainly, because I have run out of patience for softening things. Daniel was not my biological son. There had been a mix-up at the hospital, the kind of thing that sounds impossible, and yet evidently was not. 2 infants, 2 tired nurses, 1 administrative error in a busy ward in 1979. My mother had discovered this not immediately, but years later, through a confluence of circumstances that she described in careful, precise detail in the letter. She had chosen, after long deliberation, not to tell me while she was living. She had written the letter instead and put it in the shoebox and trusted me to find it when the time was right. She had added, in a postscript in slightly different ink written later, "I think Perhaps much later I believe you raised the right child anyway. I just want you to know the whole truth. You've always deserved the whole truth. I read the letter 4 times. Then I folded it precisely along its original creases and put it back in the envelope. I want to be careful about what I say here, because I know that this revelation could be presented as the hinge point of everything that came after the explanation, the justification, the reason Daniel was capable of what he was capable of. But I don't believe in that kind of clean causality. The biology of the situation didn't cause his behavior. Plenty of people who share no DNA with their parents are loving and decent, and plenty of people who do share it are not. What the letter gave me was not an explanation. It was a permission. Not permission to be angry. I had been slowly, quietly, building toward that on my own. But permission to stop centering Daniel's feelings as the primary reality to be protected. Because I realized, sitting on Miriam's narrow guest bed in the early morning, quiet, that I had spent 30 years managing my own legitimate pain in order to preserve his comfort. I had bent and adjusted, and accommodated and erased myself in the service of someone who, I now knew with molecular certainty, had never been doing the same for me. He had not been managing my feelings. He had not been protecting my comfort. He had been living in my house, eating my food, accepting my labor, and telling his friends I was the help. And here's the thing the letter cracked open in me I had always known. Not the biological fact that was genuinely new, but the essential truth beneath it. The truth that the letter simply confirmed I had always known that I was not truly seen by my son. I had spent years constructing elaborate explanations for why he behaved the way he did, generating charitable interpretations with the frantic industry of a woman who cannot afford to see clearly. The letter didn't show me something new. It just removed the last reason I'd been carrying to look away. I slept for 11 hours that night. Not from despair, from the peculiar exhaustion of a person who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has finally, carefully, set it down. In the morning, I called the lawyer. Her name was Patricia, and she was exactly what she appeared to be: efficient, compassionate, and entirely undramatic about the situation I presented to her. She looked through the documents I'd brought with me and asked clear, practical questions. Was the deed in my name only? Yes. Had any formal agreement, rental, co-ownership, anything been signed? No. Had any mortgage payments been made by the other residents? Not once. The property is yours, she said, completely and without complication. She said it simply, as though this were obvious. As though it had always been obvious. I know, I said, and for the first time in longer than I could account for, I said it without an apology attached to it. Patricia's paralegal began the filing process that same afternoon. The legal reality of it was straightforward. It was only the emotional architecture of the thing that was complex, and that was not Patricia's department. It was mine. I would have to build that alone, in Miriam's spare room, with chamomile tea and a shoebox full of my mother's careful honesty. There was one more thing in the letter: a name. My mother had done research, quietly, in the way she did everything without announcing it, without drama. She had identified the child who had been brought home by the other family. He was alive. He was 44 years old. He lived 2 towns over and ran a small landscaping business and was, by all her tentative accounts, a decent and unremarkable man in the best sense of the word. His name was Owen. I folded the letter one more time and looked out Miriam's window at the gray November sky. Owen, a name that had existed in the world all my life without my knowledge. A person grown into an adult without me. The thought of it, the entirety of it, was too large to feel all at once. So I let myself feel only the smallest piece of it, the way you eat when you're not hungry, but you know you need to slowly, carefully, without forcing it. There would be time. For the first time in years, I had something that felt like time. I want to tell you about the morning the sale went through, because I think the details matter and I think you deserve them. It was a Tuesday. Unremarkable weather, the flat gray sky of early spring that hasn't decided yet whether it means to be kind. I was sitting in Miriam's kitchen in a cotton bathrobe that had seen better decades, and my phone buzzed on the table, and I looked at the notification from my bank, and the number was there, $287,000. The sale of Ridgemont Road? I put the phone face down on the table. I made a fresh cup of coffee. I stood at the window and watched a sparrow doing something complicated with a piece of string in the gutter across the street. I thought about the 11 years of night shifts. I thought about the cash in the envelope. I thought about Mr. Hargrove shaking my hand twice, surprised. Then I cried, not from grief exactly, though grief was part of it. Not from relief, though that was part of it too. I cried because of the distance between what I had built and what I had been allowed to believe it was worth. I had accepted, for too long, an accounting of my own life that dramatically undervalued everything on the asset side and wildly inflated everything on the liability side. I had believed that I was lucky to have what I had, that I should be grateful for any warmth offered to me, that making myself smaller was the only way to make love last. That was the grief, not the house, the version of myself that had lived in it. I had called Daniel before filing. I want to be clear about this, because I think it matters to the kind of person I am trying to be. I'm not interested in cruelty, and I am not interested in revenge that dresses itself up as justice. I called him, and I told him, plainly and without theater, that I had engaged a lawyer, that the property was being listed, and that he and Renata would need to make other arrangements. The conversation was extraordinary in its smallness. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You can't be serious." I said, "The deed has my name on it." "It has always had my name on it. I'm choosing to sell. After everything we've—" He stopped. "After everything you've what, Daniel?" I asked. Not in anger. I was genuinely curious what sentence he was reaching for. He didn't finish it. Renata sent 3 emails. I read the first one, which was long and involved the word betrayal 4 times and the word family 7 times, while never once using the word gratitude. I didn't read the other 2. My lawyer handled the formal communications from that point forward. The house sold quickly, because houses that are paid off and listed at fair market value by people who are not sentimental about the transaction tend to sell quickly. The buyers were a family, 2 parents, 3 children, a large and apparently enthusiastic dog named after a minor Greek deity. The mother sent me a handwritten note after closing, thanking me for the home. She said the apple orchard was the thing that had made them decide. I kept the note. In the weeks between the call to Daniel and the closing of the sale, I did something I hadn't done in years. I moved slowly and without agenda. Miriam and I cooked dinners together and watched old films and talked the way women talk when they have survived enough that they no longer need to perform survival. I started sleeping through the night. I started eating breakfast before noon. Small reclamations, but I have learned not to be dismissive of small things. I also began, tentatively, to work toward meeting Owen. I'd thought about it for weeks before deciding, which is perhaps more consideration than some would give to meeting a stranger. But Owen was not exactly a stranger, and the situation was not exactly ordinary. I had written 2 letters, and discarded both of them, the first too formal, the second too explanatory, both of them straining too hard toward a destination the relationship hadn't yet earned. In the end, I did what felt honest. I went to the Saturday farmers market, which Miriam had mentioned Owen's landscaping business often attended for seed and supply exchanges. I stood near the entrance for 20 minutes before I moved. I'm not generally a nervous woman, but I was nervous then. He was at a stand near the back, in a heavy canvas jacket, talking to a seed vendor with the quiet attention of someone who is genuinely interested in what another person is saying. He was tall. He had my mother's hands, the exact shape of them, the way the knuckles were set. I would not have known that consciously, but something in me recognized it immediately, in the way that recognition sometimes bypasses the mind entirely. I did not approach him that day. I went home and sat with the feeling of having seen him. I let it be what it was: not a reunion, not a resolution, just a beginning, which is its own fragile and necessary thing. I went back the following week, and the week after that. Each time I stayed a little longer, moved a little closer to his part of the market. I was not ready to speak. I was not ready to ask for anything. I was simply becoming accustomed to his existence in the same space as mine, which felt, for reasons I couldn't fully articulate, like the right order of operations. The fourth time, he looked up and caught me looking at him. He didn't look away. He had still and considered eyes, and something in his expression suggested that he was a person accustomed to noticing things that other people walked past. I nodded in the way of people acknowledging that something real is happening. He nodded back. The following Saturday, I walked up and introduced myself. I said, "My name is Clara. I think there are some things we may need to talk about, if you're willing." He studied me for a moment. Then he said, "I've had some sense of that for a while." We found a bench near the garden section and sat down, and I told him the parts I could tell in the time we had: not everything, not the whole of it, but enough. He listened with the kind of attention that makes you feel your words are landing somewhere solid, not dissolving into air the moment they leave you. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That must have been a lot to carry by yourself." "It was," I said, "but I'm not carrying it the same way anymore." He nodded slowly. "What do you want from this? From talking to me?" The question was direct and fair, and I had prepared an answer. But sitting with him, I found the prepared answer was the wrong one. So I said the true thing instead. "I'm not sure yet. I think I just wanted to know you existed." He looked at the garden beds for a moment, at the early spring seedlings coming up. Then he looked back at me. "I existed," he said simply. "I'm glad you came. Here is what I know about starting over at 71. It is slower than starting over at 40, and considerably more deliberate, and almost entirely better. I know that's not what people expect to hear. The cultural narrative around women of my age is predominantly one of diminishment. You've peaked. You've served your purpose. The good parts are behind you. Whatever remains is a kind of graceful winding down that should be performed with appropriate quietness so as not to discomfort the people for whom the future is still theoretically unlimited. I have no patience for that narrative. I am not winding down. I am, if anything, winding up coiled and purposeful, and more clear-eyed about what I want from the days I have left than I have been at any other point in my life. The apartment I found that spring was small, and on the third floor of a building, with a stubborn elevator and a view of a parking structure that was, I'll admit, not exactly scenic. But it had south-facing windows and good light in the mornings, and the kitchen was mine entirely, completely, uncontestably. Mine, and I arranged it the way I wanted it and put my cast iron skillet, which I went back for specifically 2 weeks after moving out, while Daniel was at work in the center of the stovetop where it belonged and never moved it again. I had a conversation with Patricia about the financial shape of what came next. After the sale, the modest inheritance my mother had left, and the savings I'd protected over the years, I had enough to live carefully, but freely, not lavishly, but freely, which I have come to believe is the better of the two options. I made a budget that included, for the first time in years, categories for my own pleasure: books, a small travel fund, a membership to the botanical garden. These are not dramatic reclamations, they are the point. Miriam and I walk every Sunday morning now, 2 miles through the neighborhood and back, stopping at the coffee cart by the park, where the man who runs it knows our orders without asking. It took him 4 weeks to learn mine, which is black with one sugar simple, but specific. The morning he handed it to me without me speaking, I felt something disproportionate move through me, and I realized it was the accumulated weight of all the years, during which I had adjusted my preferences to match whatever was convenient for other people. Someone had learned what I liked, and then done the small labor of providing it without being asked. That is not a small thing. I want to say that plainly. Owen and I have coffee on alternate Thursdays. It took us most of the summer to arrive at this, the frequency and the format, and the ease, but we have arrived at it now, and it is something I look forward to with a warmth that I've decided not to analyze too carefully. He is a quiet man, thoughtful in the way of people who had to rely on their own observations growing up, which I recognize because I was that child too. He tells me about his work, the specific pleasures and frustrations of coaxing things to grow in soil that wasn't made for them. I tell him about the apple orchard at Ridgemont Road, and he listens with the interest of a person who would have found that interesting regardless of any connection to it. He calls me Clara, not Mom, never Mom, and I would not want that it is too much weight for a word to carry when the relationship it would be. Naming is still being built from its first material, but he introduced me once to his business partner as a person I'm glad to know, and I held that in the pocket of my jacket for the entire drive home. I'm glad to know you. What a clean and honest thing to say. In October, I did something I'm not sure I can fully explain, but that felt absolutely right. I donated a portion of the sale money, not all of it, but a meaningful amount to an organization that helps older women access legal resources when navigating housing disputes and family estrangement. I made the donation without ceremony, just a check and a handwritten note, saying I benefited from the kind of help you provide, once I was brave enough to seek it. The director called to thank me. I let it go to voicemail. I've listened to the message twice. Daniel has not contacted me since the sale completed. I have not contacted him. I'll be honest with you, I do not know what the future holds in that direction, and I've made my peace with not knowing. What I can tell you is that my grief for the version of that relationship I believed in has been, over these months, quietly metabolizing into something else, not bitterness, not indifference, but a kind of clear-eyed sorrow, the way you grieve a plant that didn't survive transplanting. You can be sorry for the loss without pretending you could have kept it alive by sheer will. He is whoever he is. I loved him entirely. Both of those things can be true. What I know about myself, what this year has given back to me, is something harder to name, but more important than anything I lost. It is the knowledge that I am someone worth accounting for, that my preferences are legitimate, that my name on a document means something, that my labor has value, and my presence is not contingent on my usefulness to other people's comfort. These are things I should have known at 20. I know them at 71, and I refuse to be diminished by the delay. I simply know them now. I am building with them now. Last month, I signed a 1-year lease on a plot at the community garden 3 blocks from my apartment. It's a 6 by 8-foot rectangle of slightly clay-heavy soil with full sun from 10 to 4, which is, according to the volunteer horticulturist who manages the space, ideal for most things I've told her I want to grow. I have planted garlic, which is patient and underground and will not be ready until June. I have planted kale and late-season spinach, which are already coming up small, precise, unambiguous green. I am planning, for next spring, to attempt a dwarf apple tree in a half-barrel container. The horticulturist says it can be done with proper rootstock and consistent watering. I believe her. I am 71 years old. I have started over in a third-floor apartment with south-facing windows. My son does not call me, and I call my friend Miriam on Sunday mornings, and I have coffee with a man named Owen, who has my mother's hands, and I grow things in a small rectangle of city soil. And every morning, I make coffee in my kitchen black, 1 sugar, in a mug I chose, and I stand at the window in the early light and feel, with a clarity that no one gave me and no one can take away, that this particular life is mine. Not what's left of a life, not the remains of something larger. This is it. And it is, against all odds and in spite of everything, enough. More than enough. It is everything. If any part of this story felt familiar, if you have ever made yourself small to make someone else comfortable, ever apologized for taking up space in a home you paid for, ever smiled when what you needed was to speak, then this story was written for you. You are not invisible. You are not unreasonable. You are not too old or too late or too much. You are someone worth accounting for. And the rest of the story is still yours to write.